Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, proud to support the mission of KPBS and privileged to serve San Diego clients. Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, helping homeowners maintain drain, heating, and cooling systems since 1978. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. It's Tuesday, June 16th. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Coronavirus infections are up in 18 states, and despite reopenings, health officials say the virus is still a serious threat. Today, San Diego County announced 3 more people have died and 120 new positive case tests. So far, our county has avoided a surge in cases, but across the country, more than 2 million Americans have been infected and more than 116,000 have died. Now, a key model is predicting 200,000 more deaths by October. Camila Bernal has more.
Across the country, from Miami to Los Angeles, state and local officials are continuing to move towards reopening their economies. But government and health officials also warn that COVID-19 is still a threat.
The virus is what drives the timeline. We can only stay open if we stay safe.
Currently, the rate of confirmed infections is going up in 18 states. In an interview with NPR, Dr. Anthony Fauci said the trends are, quote, troublesome.
Even when states officially go by the standard type of recommendations, you still see people within a state or a city who are essentially not adhering to the kinds of recommendations, particularly in situations of congregating together without wearing a mask.
COVID-19 has killed more than 116,000 Americans this year. And a key coronavirus model is now predicting the U.S. will see 200,000 deaths by October 1st. Experts saying increased movement and the relaxing of social distancing guidelines is leading to more infections. But health experts say Americans can change the outcome and that masks and social distancing will continue to be important in fighting the pandemic.
These models are not inevitable. Our actions today have a huge effect on what happens, and so we really need to take every precaution.
Camila Bernal, KPBS News.
Now, after months of school closures, the San Diego Unified School District is deciding on a strategy for reopening amid the pandemic. KPBS education reporter Joe Hong spoke to a school board member about the ideal scenario for reopening.
The San Diego Unified School Board is holding a virtual public meeting today to share the district's plans for reopening in the fall. Ideally, students would have full school days with social distancing and smaller class sizes. Students whose families have health concerns would have the option of distance learning. But district officials agree that getting students back on campuses must be a top priority.
Those students really need to be back in school.
Richard Becerra is the vice president of the school board.
I will support a scenario that allows for full reopening of all of our schools all day, every day, with an option for high quality continued online learning for students or staff who are not comfortable yet coming back.
Becerra said he and the other school board members agree in principle on an overall reopening plan, but it will be up to individual schools to decide on the details for what the school days will look like. Classrooms might separate desks with plexiglass. Schools might need more teachers. Recesses could be split up. But much of this would depend on state and federal funding. In a Tuesday news release, Superintendent Cindy Martin applauded the budget passed this week by the California State Legislature, which reversed $12 billion in cuts to education proposed by Governor Gavin Newsom. Martin said, "We appreciate the bold action taken by the legislature to reverse all spending cuts contained in the May budget revision. We urge Governor Newsom to sign this budget and approve a final compromise that gives schools the funds we will need to open in a safe, responsible manner this fall." Becerra expects the governor and state legislature to reach an agreement on the state budget within the next few days. San Diego Unified's own budget will be finalized by June 30th. Joe Hong, KPBS News.
The UC Board of Regents is endorsing a state constitutional amendment that would allow race and gender to be considered in admissions. The board oversees the 10 University of California campuses, including UC San Diego. The amendment would repeal Proposition 209, which banned affirmative action in 1996. It must pass the Senate with a 2/3 margin before June 25th to make it on the November ballot. Victims of the Poway Synagogue shooting are suing the alleged gunman and the company that made the AR-15 used in the attack. One person was killed and others were injured in the shooting that prosecutors say was fueled by anti-Semitism. KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman spoke with a legal analyst to break down the complaint.
Something like this, is it expected? Like, were you expecting a lawsuit like this?
Yes, when there's a mass shooting, there is probably going to be litigation because people are hurting.
Victims of the Poway Synagogue attack, including Rabbi Yisrael Goldstein, who lost a finger in the shooting, are all plaintiffs in this suit. They're being represented by Brady, a group whose mission it is to end gun violence. Legal analyst Dan Eaton says Brady's involvement in the suit is key.
They're very expensive to litigate, and they're very tough to prove. That's why you see the involvement of gun control advocates.
A complaint filed in San Diego Superior Court names multiple defendants, including the alleged shooter John Earnest, his parents, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the store where the gun was purchased, and Smith & Wesson, which made the firearm. Plaintiffs say they all bear responsibility for the shooting.
Everyone who could possibly have any role in preventing this from happening.
The suit is targeting the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, too, and San Diego Guns, because the hunting license authorities say Ernest used to buy the gun was not valid.
You can't imagine, for example, someone having a driver's license before they're allowed to drive.
The suit also says firearm manufacturer Smith & Wesson bears liability.
The allegation is that they made it too attractive through their marketing for an impulsive, militaristic young man.
The complaint alleges that defendants should have done more to prevent the shooting, but Eaton says attorneys will argue that it's not so black and white.
Do we know what this group is asking for? Are they asking for money, policy changes, or?
All of the above. The plaintiffs, and understand that you talk about the group, the group is providing litigation support, but these are real people who are suing, and they're real people in our community who claim that they were hurt.
Victims are seeking compensation, but also ways to prevent a shooting like this from happening again. Eaton says the case could take years to get a final resolution. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
We reached out to Smith & Wesson and San Diego Guns for comment on the story, but haven't heard back. State Fish and Wildlife officials declined to comment. Political Action Committee San Diego County gun owners calls the allegations frivolous, saying the local gun store followed state law and therefore bears no responsibility. Amid protests calling out police brutality, today President Trump signed an executive order to reform the nation's police practices. Here is Nadia Romero with the details.
After meeting with families whose loved ones were victims of police violence and racial profiling,
all Americans mourn by your side. Your loved ones will not have died in vain.
President Trump signing an executive order to change some police practices.
To deliver a future of safety and security for Americans of every race, religion, color, and creed.
Among the reforms, the order establishes a national database to track the excessive use of force by officers and any convictions or judgments against officers for improper use of force. It provides more funding to departments for training officers in use of force and de-escalation techniques, and bans chokeholds, except in instances when an officer's life is in danger and the use of deadly force is allowed by law. And it encourages police departments to add social workers or mental health professionals to respond to calls related to mental health, including drug addiction and homelessness. The president, who prides himself on promoting law and order, also strongly defending police.
Americans know the truth. Without police, there is chaos. Without law, there is anarchy. And without safety, there is catastrophe.
But some say this action isn't enough.
It will not do anything to correct police brutality, which is the real issue.
President Trump now punting to Congress to put more police reforms into law.
And hopefully they'll all get together and they'll come up with a solution that goes even beyond what we're signing today, but this is a big, big step.
At the White House, I'm Nadia Romero.
California Attorney General Javier Becerra is calling for changes to law enforcement across the state.
We cannot afford to ignore the realities faced by Black Americans and people of color in this nation and in our state. With Americans across the country standing up against injustice and racism, we have been called to reckon with the systemic failures that cause and allow police misconduct to perpetuate.
Becerra is recommending local agencies implement de-escalation tactics before using force and reporting all use of force incidents for public review. Some of these changes are set to take effect in 2021 under a law passed last year, but Becerra says departments should act now. He also wants to partner with lawmakers to introduce reforms. One proposal would create a statewide system for decertifying officers for serious misconduct. Another would place limits on using rubber bullets, tear gas, and pepper spray for crowd control. Heading north to Canada or south to Mexico, travelers will have to wait through at least another month of border closures because of the pandemic. The Department of Homeland Security will keep the borders closed to non-essential travel through at least the 21st of July. Trade will continue between the countries, and Americans who are returning to the U.S. are exempt from the border closures. The first woman to lead a Marine combat unit will step down Thursday at Camp Pendleton. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh says it is a milestone for a service that hasn't always welcomed women.
The clock is ticking on Lieutenant Colonel Michelle McAnder. 2 years ago, she became the first woman to lead a Marine ground combat unit after the Pentagon required the Marines to open up all combat positions to women in 2015. After this week, her picture will be on the wall in the hallway leading up to her office, as she's scheduled to step down as part of a regular change of command.
I'm going to miss the 1,300 Marines and sailors that make up this battalion and come to work every day trying to do their best.
The 1st Combat Engineer Battalion is part of the 1st Marine Division at Camp Pendleton. Since the Pentagon rejected the Marines' request to exempt the Corps from allowing women into combat roles, a relative handful of women have successfully entered combat positions, fewer than the other services, including the Army. Engineers allowed women to serve in certain roles for 20 years, which put McAnder in a better position to rise through the ranks. It may take years for other women to rise to her level in other kinds of combat units and then move beyond.
We haven't had female division commanders. That's probably quite some time away, but we've never had a female 4-star general, but I think that will happen.
Despite the Marines' reluctance to open up combat positions, women have been serving in war zones for years. McAnder has 2 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan.
That didn't keep up with the reality on the ground, which was female Marines have been in danger during OIF and OEF. Because they were filling combat positions even if they didn't have combat specialties.
The restrictions simply limited the options for the relatively few women who have been able to position themselves to lead Marine units in combat.
When I first married my wife, she said, "I hope that you never deploy." And I said, that would be taking away the best part of my job. And so it is where you learn the most and where I think you grow the most as a Marine and as an officer. But then there are also, Marines are in danger, and unfortunately, casualties are a part of that experience.
McAnder now heads to the East Coast for 3 years of schooling. Approaching 20 years in the Marines, she plans to stay in the Corps to see how far she can lead. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
A cooling trend is continuing this week, but warmer weather is on the horizon. Mark Mancuso has your forecast.
Extensive coastal clouds will be with us the next couple of days, and also the cool temperatures. Temperatures gradually cooling next couple of days, but by the end of the week, a ridge of high pressure starts to nudge in, so we will see some slightly warmer temperatures perhaps Friday and then into the weekend. But all in all, it's kind of a quiet week here weather-wise. Looking at our temperatures tonight, low 60s, Oceanside, San Diego in the mid-60s. Clouds thick along the coast here. Heading inland, temperature drops down to 57 in Ramona, 63 in El Cajon, Borrego Springs, 69, and Mount Laguna, 55. For tomorrow, well, no big changes here. Seasonable temperatures are slightly below average temperatures in our area. Forecast highs with the clouds, 73 in Oceanside and 71 in San Diego. Well, more sunshine in the interior. Ramona, 79. Borrego Springs hits 100. And we'll see a high of 80 in Campo. Looking ahead, subtle change here. Still have this onshore flow. So we'll see morning clouds giving way to afternoon sun. Marine layer will gradually lose its grip on the area. Next couple of days, low clouds extensive, then some sunshine, especially as we head towards the weekend. And as we take a look at the inland areas, we'll see plenty of sunshine here, and the temperatures gradually rising as we take you into the weekend. In the mountains, it looks beautiful, doesn't it? Highs in the upper 60s to some low 70s, mid 70s by Sunday. And as we check out the deserts, highs will be hovering close to the century mark. And then over the weekend, temperatures will gradually rise. For KPBS News, I'm meteorologist Mark Mancuso.
The painful consequences of the Paradise Fire will continue to be felt long after the flames were put out. And today, Pacific Gas and Electric took responsibility for causing the death and destruction that ripped through the Northern California town of Paradise in November of 2018. The utility company pleaded guilty to 84 felony counts of involuntary manslaughter. CEO Bill Johnson acknowledged that the fire was ignited by PG&E's rickety electrical grid. The company will pay $3.5 million fine and $500,000 for the criminal investigation. Novio Pharmaceuticals catapulted into the spotlight after saying it had rapidly developed a coronavirus vaccine at its San Diego lab. The news also boosted its stock prices. KPBS health reporter Taryn Mento says the company now faces a class action lawsuit for allegedly exploiting the pandemic for profit.
Novio's work on a vaccine was covered by KPBS multiple times.
KPBS health reporter Taryn Mento has been following the progress at Novio Pharmaceuticals.
It was recently touted by San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer.
Great company that is also receiving national and worldwide attention on Novio's vaccine research.
And it was featured on 60 Minutes in late March.
At Novio Pharmaceuticals in San Diego.
Weeks earlier, on February 14th, Novio CEO Joseph Kim appeared on Fox Business. He declared his company's DNA technology developed a coronavirus vaccine at an incredible speed.
We're able to construct our vaccine, INO 4800, in about 3 hours.
And he said the company was preparing to begin testing in summer. Kim repeated the claim on March 2nd during a recorded meeting with President Donald Trump.
By getting just the DNA sequence of the virus, we're able to fully construct our vaccine within 3 hours.
And he added human testing would be moved up to April. But a class action lawsuit filed by investors who purchased shares after these comments claimed the boasting was inaccurate. They say it was intended to drive up the company's market value. Novio's share prices spiked around the time of Kim's comments, but dropped after a research firm questioned that Novio developed a vaccine in 3 hours. Novio told KPBS the claims are a result of misunderstanding the science behind DNA medicine. A plaintiff's attorney did not respond to messages seeking comment. University of San Diego law professor David McGowan says there are 3 points to consider in these types of cases.
There's an alleged misstatement, there's an alleged correction, and then there's an allegation of motive.
The alleged misstatements were the comments by Kim. The alleged motive is the company could sell stock at a high price. The alleged correction came when Citron Research tweeted that Novio's 3-hour vaccine development was, quote, ludicrous, and it called on the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission to investigate. Novio appeared to respond in a tweet later that day that it had created a, quote, vaccine construct in 3 hours, but was confident that it had a viable product.
So those come together to depict the plaintiff creates a story. There was a misstatement. Why? Because of this motive, and then the truth came out, and this is what happened.
He says there are a few points that may bode well for Novio. First, the report by Citron was from a short seller. They generally have a stake in stocks going down.
It doesn't mean it was wrong, but it's something to take into account.
And he points to the impact on the market of Kim's alleged misstatements. McGowan says there wasn't a major spike in price after Kim's first comment, Novio developed a vaccine quicker than you can watch Lord of the Rings. He says the sharpest increase came later when Kim told President Trump about human testing in April.
Which would make sense if you're an investor and you think that the closer you get to testing, the closer you might be to a product.
And the company's value eventually went back up after the Citron tweet, suggesting market confidence. The lawsuit was filed in March, but we know that Novio did begin human testing in April. But Novio had to have some factual basis to make that statement back then. UCLA law professor James Park says publicly traded companies are held to pretty high standards.
But if you're disregarding certain red flags or evidence indicating that your statement is false, that can be considered sufficient to establish fraudulent intent.
So if the case moves forward, Park says Novio may have to show evidence that backs its statements about testing and that it developed a vaccine in that 3 hours.
You might look at internal emails or documents that the company might have produced about its various development of the vaccine. And if there's no documentation at all supporting that there is a viable vaccine that's been developed, then the company should have been aware that there was no basis for making the statement.
Both McGowan and Park expect Novio to request dismissing the case. Park says securities fraud suits against pharma companies are tossed out nearly half the time. But he thinks there are enough questions that a judge may allow this case to go forward.
Surviving a motion to dismiss does not necessarily mean this is a good case. It only means that the court wants to learn more about the facts.
That could be months away at least. Novio said in federal filings it plans to vigorously fight the case. And earlier this month, the company said it will begin another clinical trial with its vaccine in South Korea. Taryn Mento, KPBS News.
And existing shareholders also filed suit against the company in April and just on Friday. Researchers in England say a drug already on the market is the first to show improved odds of surviving COVID-19. It's called dexamethasone. The drug is an anti-inflammatory used for arthritis and asthma. It's been used in a COVID-19 clinical trial since the virus inflames the lungs. Doctors say the drug reduced deaths by 1/3 in patients who were put on a ventilator. Families in the San Diego area are making what could be life and death decisions when deciding whether to keep loved ones in a nursing home hit with COVID-19. But as KPBS's Amita Sharma reports, they are not being helped by conflicting state and federal data on cases.
The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services published the first highly anticipated national data on nursing home COVID-19 cases and deaths late last month. But in many instances, there are big gaps between those figures and numbers reported by the California Department of Public Health. For example, the state says so far 16 residents at Victoria Post Acute in El Cajon have died of COVID-19, but the new Medicare website says 43 residents in the facility have died. Victoria Executive Director Colton LeVar wrote in an email to KPBS, quote, "The data reflected for Victoria Post-Acute Care in the CMS reports is incorrect. I am not sure of the source of the error," unquote. Medicare and Medicaid Services spokesman Jack Cheevers wrote in an email that while there may be some discrepancies in the numbers, most are accurate. He wrote that one issue has been, quote, nursing facilities reporting cumulative cases instead of only new cases on a daily basis, which inflates their case numbers. Whatever the cause of the error, Tony Chicotel, staff lawyer for California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform, says ultimately the data is meant to identify where the coronavirus hotspots are so those facilities can get help.
So people get hurt when the data is wrong. And I think the message to consumers is that the regulators don't really have control of this.
State health officials did not comment on the discrepancies. Amita Sharma, KPBS News.
Warnings about the devastating effects of a second wave of coronavirus cases continue, but a top U.S. health official says it'll be even worse if Americans don't do one thing. Mandy Gaither explains.
It's not like you haven't heard this before. Health officials urging everyone to get a flu shot. But the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says now is especially important to be vaccinated against the flu. Dr. Robert Redfield says if a second wave of coronavirus hits when the flu season is underway, it could really strain hospitals. But if more people get their flu shot, that could ease a potential strain on resources. He says only about 47% of Americans take advantage of the flu vaccine, but he's hoping the public will see it's a major way they can help this nation population get through the fall. Not all flu cases are reported, but the CDC estimates that from October 1st, 2019 through April 4th, 2020, there were up to 56 million cases of the flu with up to 62,000 deaths. While the flu is detected year-round in the U.S., flu viruses are most common during the fall and winter. For today's Health Minute, I'm Mandy Gaither.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, the president signs an executive order on law enforcement as major questions remain about the widespread use of force. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
And here's another look at today's top stories. Coronavirus infections are up in 18 states. Now, a key model is predicting 200,000 more deaths by October. Today, San Diego County announced 3 more people have died and 120 new positive tests. So far, our county has avoided a surge in cases. The San Diego Unified School Board is holding a virtual meeting to share its plans for reopening in the fall. Ideally, students would have full school days with social distancing and smaller class sizes. Students with health concerns would have the option of distance learning. Much of it will depend on state and federal funding. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Have a great evening.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, proud to support the mission of KPBS and privileged to serve San Diego clients. Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, helping homeowners maintain drain, heating, and cooling systems since 1978. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.